Hey guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a graphic novel that I recently finished reading. The Walt Simonson Thor Visionaries Volume 5. This is the final volume of Walt Simonson's run on Thor, and this collects issues 375 through 382 of Thor. And like I mentioned in Volume 4 of this run, this is written by Walt Simonson but drawn by Sal Buscema. Walt Simonson provided the art on his run for the first 3 volumes, if you're reading this run in trades. The first 3 volumes were drawn and written by Simonson, but starting in Volume 4, art was provided by Sal Buscema. And I do want to go ahead and say that Buscema's art is really good. I like it quite a bit. I'm not sure if I like it more or less than Simonson's art. In a way, it's very similar to Simonson, but you can also tell that it's not drawn by Simonson. But it's kind of got that sort of angular feeling that Simonson's run has, or Simonson's art has. But I like his art quite a bit. I want to say maybe I like Walt Simonson's art a little bit more, but that's not a slight against Sal Buscema. I still like his art quite a bit too. But I just wanted to get that out of the way so that I don't forget to mention that once I get to talking about the book. So this run, Walt Simonson's run on Thor, is talked about very highly amongst people who are big comic book fans. They talk about it in the same breaths that they talk about John Byrne's Fantastic Four, or Frank Miller's Daredevil, or Chris Claremont's X-Men, or Peter David's Hulk run. They talk about it in the same breaths that they talk about those runs. Like, this is the classics. This is the best that this series has ever been. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that there is another run on Thor that is as good or better than Walt Simonson's run. Although in recent years I have heard people say that J. Michael Straczynski's run is really good. I read Straczynski's run. I'm not sure if I would say it's the best. It is pretty good and enjoyable, what I remember of it, but I'm not sure if I would say that it's the best that there ever is, because I'm not a huge expert on Thor. I don't know everything about the character. But I have heard a lot of people say that Walt Simonson's run is just the absolute best that Thor has ever been or ever will be. And I have to say, this whole run was a little bit of a disappointment, and that's going to sound meaner than I want it to sound, because I really did enjoy the first 2 volumes of his run. The first 2 volumes, since I have been reading this run in trade, I know some people will read this in back issues, or they remember reading it when it came out in the 80s. I've been reading it in these Visionary volumes, but the first 2 volumes was leading up to the big battle with Surtur, and then Volume 2, the big battle with Surtur itself, as well as Malekith the I think the Unknown or the Accursed. I want to say it's Malekith the Accursed, but he's the Dark Elf who was one of the bad guys in Thor: The Dark World, but handled much better in Walt Simonson's comic book series. And I really like all that stuff in Volumes 1 and 2, building up to this huge epic battle like we have never seen before in this series. And then after that, it just seems like everything else that's happened in Simonson's run has been so much smaller than the big battle with Surtur. We see Thor go to the underworld to rescue a whole bunch of mortals from Hela. And then in Volume 4, he becomes a frog, or that might have been in Volume 3. But then he participates in the Mutant Massacre. He fights some of the marauders who are killing Morlocks underground. And then in this volume, we have Loki is trying to take over Asgard, and you've got the giants, and they're trying to take over Asgard. And all this might sound on paper like it's a really big epic story, but none of it feels like it can even possibly measure up to the big battle with Surtur that concluded in Volume 2. And as I've been reading this run, I've been saying, to myself anyway, I've been saying a lot of this is really enjoyable and is really fun, but I wish that Simonson had kind of switched it up a little bit. I wish that he had ended his run with the big battle of Surtur and the death of Odin, and then having Baldur become the Emperor of Asgard after that. I wish that he had ended his run with all of that and led up to the big battle of Surtur with all these, what I feel like are smaller stories that happen in the last 3 volumes. Have the Baldur the Brave miniseries, where Baldur goes off and has adventures in Nornkeep, or have this story where Thor goes to the underworld to rescue a whole bunch of mortal souls from Hela. You can do all of that. You can kind of switch up some of the events of this run without really changing what happens in later parts of the run. You could kind of switch up some of the events, and you could lead up to the big battle of Surtur instead of following the battle of Surtur, because I feel like after Volume 2, this series cannot possibly match up to that level of epic. And it really was epic. And I hate it when people use that word so much these days that it's kind of lost its meaning. But you read the first 2 volumes of Simonson's Thor, and you're thinking, this is the most hardened, grizzled, battle, huge epicness. I mean, that's what it is. It's epicness. And I can't think of another word, as evidenced by me failing to grasp the English language just now. But everything after that is just kind of alright. I don't really think that there's anything bad about this run overall. I think it's a pretty fun, enjoyable run, but I think that Simonson may have shown his hand too soon. I think that he played his best card right out the gate, and then after that, it's like, well, what in the world can I possibly do now? So he does a whole bunch of stories which are fine, and they would have been fine if he had started out with these smaller stories and worked his way up to this big, huge, epic, grand guignol, there's a word I could have used, grand guignol of all Thor stories. He could have ended with that instead of beginning with that. And honestly, that's really my only criticism of this book and overall of the entire run. I know there's probably a lot of people out there who are thinking, you're insane. Simonson's run on Thor is fantastic. And you know what? If you think that, then I would like to know why you think that in the comments below. But I'm not going to be angry at you for thinking that. I'm very happy that people like this run. And I enjoy it too, but I do feel like it's a little bit mismatched in the way that it presents events to us. I still think that this run could have been so much better if it had been presented in a way that I mentioned, where you take all the events of the first 2 volumes and have that be the end of this run instead of the very beginning of this run. Beyond that, I don't have a whole lot else to say about this. Thor is one of those characters who is kind of perpetually stuck in this particular status quo, and I say this knowing full well that for the last, 5 years, Thor has kind of escaped this status quo that I'm about to describe, but it seems like in the older Thor stories from before the 21st century, you had all the time, Thor is living on Asgard, Loki is living on Asgard, everyone in the world knows that Loki is evil, Loki does some evil plan, everyone knows that it's Loki, but then nobody does anything to punish Loki. And this run does end with Thor breaking Loki's arm, and that's probably the closest that Thor has ever come to reprimanding Loki. I know there's a miniseries that was kind of focused on Loki, and I've read it before, and I can't remember what it was called. It might have been called Brothers in Blood. It's had a few different titles, I think, when it's been reprinted, but that's one of those stories that is kind of like, oh, this is something where Thor actually does kind of reprimand his brother. But for the most part, I feel like Thor is always kind of stuck in that status quo where it's like, okay, we have to have Loki living on Asgard because he's one of our only villains that we can use, so even though everyone in Asgard knows that he's evil, we can't really have them kill him or execute him or anything like that, even though they all should know that he's evil, and they shouldn't keep putting up with his villainy and his antics. And then you've got characters like the Enchantress. In this, she's mourning the death of the Executioner, who was kind of sort of her... I don't want to say boyfriend because she didn't really care about him, but he was in love with her, and he died back in volume 3, and then she's only just now getting around to mourning for him here, and then Heimdall is trying to get her to come out of her state of mourning, and there seems to be a hint that Heimdall and the Enchantress are going to kind of become an item, but then this run just kind of stops, and it doesn't really address that. Are they going to become an item, or are they just going to be platonic friends? I don't know. I can't tell you that, because at one point we see them almost about to kiss, and then they both pass out from this virus that Loki has released on Asgard. And then, speaking of this virus, for some reason, everyone on Asgard is affected by it, except for Volstagg. For some reason, he passes out, and then he wakes back up. Now we see that Curse, who was introduced 2 volumes ago, Curse is able to revive Baldur by giving him this magic water that cures him. So we know why Baldur isn't affected, although he was affected, but then he's cured. But then Volstagg doesn't drink any of the water, so why is he not affected? Why is he able to just get back up when this virus makes everyone else turn into sort of a statue? It's not exactly the same virus as what affected the citizens of Carnilla's kingdom, but it's similar enough that they mention that it's similar to that disease or whatever it was. And it just kind of, this run just kind of stops. Thor is finally able to lift the curse that Hela put on him at the very end of the previous volume where she said, you can no longer die. I don't think I mentioned that whenever I reviewed volume 4, but she said, you cannot die, but your bones are going to be really brittle, and so it's going to be really impossible for you to A, go into battle because you're going to be in excruciating pain, and B, you're not going to be able to have a warrior's death, which is what any Viking wants, what any Norse god wants. They want a warrior's death, and you're not going to get to have it because I forbid you from dying. And and since she's the goddess of death, she can do that sort of thing. At the end of this volume, Thor is able to trick Hela into lifting that curse on him. He does something that's probably the smartest thing that I've ever seen Thor do, because Thor kind of has this reputation of being a bit of a good-natured idiot, especially compared to his brother, who is very evil-natured but is also intelligent. But here, Thor actually uses his brains in a way that surprised me, and that's not to say that I think Thor is just a rampaging stupid head, but most of the time, even though he is a good guy, you don't usually see him using his intellect in any situation. So that kind of surprised me that he was able to use it here. But throughout this run, since he has such brittle bones, and since Loki is trying to send all these different characters to break his bones earlier in the book, since he's doing that, Thor has to go to Tony Stark to actually, he broke one of his arms in the Mutant Massacre in the previous volume. So he goes to Tony at the beginning of this volume. Tony makes this basically this big metal cast so that it will keep his bones from sliding around, and it will allow them to heal properly. But then Thor goes to Pittsburgh and he rents out this big metal shop for like a week, and he's able to make this giant suit of armor. So that's why he looks different here than what he normally looks. And I'm not sure if Thor retained this look after Simonson's run, because I haven't read really any Thor comics from here all the way up to J. Michael Straczynski's run. So I don't know if he kept wearing this metal suit of armor that basically existed just to kind of protect him. Because at the end of this book, the curse, he's able to die again. He's able to make Hela remove the curse so that he can die anytime, he wants to, I guess. But it's not really clear if she removes the curse on his brittle bones. That's not really made clear. Again, this run, it seems to just kind of stop. It doesn't really conclude a whole lot of the subplots and plots that are going on. Some of the plots it concludes, but a lot of them are just kind of left hanging, like the thing with Amora and Heimdall, or the curse on Thor. Are both of these curses lifted, or just one of them? We know one of them's lifted, and stuff like that kind of bothers me about this run, on top of what I said earlier about how I really do feel like this run would have been better served if it had ended with the big battle with Searcher instead of the beginning of the run happening with all that. Overall, I don't think that there's anything truly bad about this run. It's a fine, enjoyable, fun little run, but I feel like it's been overhyped, and I feel like everyone in the world talking it up like it's one of the greatest runs in comics ever. I feel like that kind of deteriorated what could have been my enjoyment of this run. And also, I do feel like part of the reason I'm not enjoying it is because I really do, and I've said this like 100 times in this video, but I really do think that Simonson kind of messed up in presenting all of the plots in the order that he presented them to us. So those are my basic overall thoughts with the Thor Visionaries Volume 5, and also Simonson's run on Thor altogether. So let me know what you guys thought of this video in the comments below, and if you like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I do plan on reading and reviewing some other Thor books in the coming weeks and months. I have a few others on my shelf that I haven't read, and I'll be getting to those eventually, so look forward to some of those in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, I also do other videos, so check those out this week. And I will see you guys later on. You have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.